بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our lessons on elevating our sisters, lessons and benefits from the great women in Al-Islam. Inshallah, this week we will continue, and perhaps for another week or so we will continue in this series, mentioning the biographies and the benefits and lessons that we can learn from the greatest women in Al-Islam. And we covered many great women and their lives and their lessons and the things that we could benefit and emulate in our lives, both male and female, especially for the sisters. And the intent behind all of this is to increase us in motivation, in aspiration, to be like those before us, those who have walked the path of greatness, those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed them to be from the righteous and to be from the people of knowledge and good deeds. And inshallah, whatever we mention, we hope that it would allow the sisters foremost, and by extension also the brothers, to improve in their daily lives and to look towards the people who truly are to be emulated. And for those reasons, inshallah, every time we pick one of the great illuminaries in our history, it does not necessitate by us selecting one of them that we are in somehow neglecting or doing injustice to another. For in reality, there are so many great male and female figures in this religion that for us to select and to speak about and to highlight the lives of all of them would really be something which is very difficult. And due to our own limitations and our own lack of time, we will not be able to do so. So all we're really doing here is taking and selecting fruits, selecting benefits and gold gems from these great biographies. And inshallah, it would motivate us to put forth more effort in trying to familiarize ourselves with these great individuals. Today, inshallah, I want to talk about a female scholar, a female reformer in her own lifetime. I alluded to her before in our series on flag bearers, but today, inshallah, I will actually cover her biography, and that is a woman who lived in the 8th century in Islamic history, in a time period of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. And during the discussion about the biography of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, we mentioned that he had many male and female students. And one of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah's female students was the woman who I want to cover her biography today. Her name was Fatima bint Abbas al-Hanbaliyyah. And I'm going to, inshallah, highlight her life. This great student and contemporary of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. She was a scholar, a notable student of his and others, a reformer for the sisters at a time period when there was no shortage of reformers and people of knowledge. And what's unique about her and what's so interesting is that as many of us are familiar with the life and times of Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah and his students, in the foremost being Imam ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah and Imam al-Dhahabi and Ibn Rajab and Ibn Kathir and etc. Amongst this cohort of great scholars, there was this female scholar, subhanallah. Da'iyah, she was a caller to Islam, reformer of the sisters. And I believe that she will be a great inspiration for all of the sisters to be like her, especially in an era in which we live in which, alhamdulillah, there are still female reformers. They still exist today. female scholars. They still exist today, authors. But the shortage of those kind of influences is not hidden from anyone. Not those who are far, nor those who are near. And so inshallah, through this story, the biography of this great woman, we'll be able to be inspired, inshallah, for the sisters especially, to be inspired to increase in our excellence in our knowledge, but also the da'wah and the khair that we can do. So we'll begin first with her name. The ulama, they mention, and her biography was collected by her own contemporaries. So for example, Hafid ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, in al-Bidayah wa nihaya. She was also mentioned by Imam al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, in Sirah Alam al-Nubala. Hafid ibn Rajab in Zayd Tabaqat al-Hanabila, al-Safadi in A'yan al-Asr, and a few others talk about her. Taqiyuddin al-Maqrizi as well, in Mawa'id wal-I'tibar. So her biography is well documented by the scholars, indicating that she was a scholar. Imam Dhahabi in Ibar fi Khabar man Ghabar, not as Sir Alam. And so what we take from this is that she was definitely a notable figure, known. So we begin first with her name. Her name is Fatima bint Abbas bin Abi Fath. Fatima bint Abbas bin Abi Fath. And some of the scholars, they have this slightly different, like Imam Hafid ibn Hajar. He also mentions her biography in Durar al-Kamina, and he gives the name, I believe here he says it's Fatima bint Ayyash. So he has a slightly different. What the others they mention, Fatima bint Abbas. And this seems to be probably more correct, because the scholars who give that are her contemporaries. Her laqab, al-Hanbaliyyah, because she was Hanbali madhab. Al-Baghdadiyyah, from Baghdad in origin. Her kunya, Zainab. Zainab. And so what we take from this is that her name, Fatima, and her kunya Zainab, is indicating names of the daughters of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Fatima bint Abbas bin Abi Fath al-Hanbaliyyah al-Baghdadiyyah Zainab. And it's mentioned that she was born in the years 714 Hijri in Cairo, Al-Qahira. And in terms of her description, this is important because the ulama, when they mention her and her life, they mention usually the ascriptions, the epithets and the labels and the names given. And this is the tradition of the ulama. When they usually do the biography of somebody, they usually begin the biography by mentioning this person's great qualities or descriptions as a way to recognize and to allow everyone to know who they are. So a number of the ulama, they mention, after they mention her name, Shaykha. She was a Shaykha, Muftiyya, Wa'idha, Faqihah, ala madhab al-Hanbali. She was a Shaykha, a female Shaykh. And this is proof that there's such thing as a Shaykha. We have them. They exist, they are alive. There's such things as female scholars. Muftiyya, one who used to pass the fatwas, a female mufti. And again, these are not hidden from us, from the biographies that we already covered. Aisha radiallahu anha, Darda we passed last week, and others. Wa'ida, she one who used to give wa'ad, admonishments. Faqiha, she was a faqih. Just like as we mentioned last week and before that, scholars and female scholars who were faqihs, they were jurists. And she was a faqih upon the madhab of Imam Ahmad. And this was the dominant madhab, we said, at the time, at least in Sham, as well as in other places. In terms of her seerah, in terms of her biography, and how did she learn and where did she learn? So we begin from verse mentioning she was also nicknamed Sayyida, the leading female figure. Nisa, Sayyidatun Nisa Zamaniha. She was the leading female figure of her time. And she was a student of none other than Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. Min Ahl al-Baghdad. She was from Baghdad, but she lived in Damascus, Dimashq, since her young age, since she was a youth. And then later in her life, she moved to Cairo. So she was born in Cairo, but originally from Baghdad, then stayed a good portion of her life in Damascus before moving back to Cairo. So inshallah, we begin now her biography in terms of her education. So there's not much information about whether or not she studied in Baghdad, even though originally she's from there and she was born there. But we do know that she studied and grew up, i.e. her education, Islamic education, in Sham, in Greater Syria, specifically Damascus. And this was, we mentioned before, that in Syria at the time, there were many madaris and marakis, scholarly places where students would go and they would study. And these places where they would study, usually they would go and they would study depending on the madhab. And this was the common trend, we said. So for example, we mentioned in our biography of Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, I believe it was, or it was Ibn Taymiyyah. I think it was biography of Ibn Taymiyyah. We mentioned that there was different madaris, Madrasa Umariyah, and other madaris of the Hanabila, etc. So she studied in one of those kind of institutes in which the student would study with the Shaykh, primarily with the Quran, beginning with the Quran, and then into the rudimentary text of the Hanbali madhab and the likes. And this is how they used to study at that time. So she studied at the hands of Shamsuddin ibn Abi Umar al-Maqdisi. And this we mentioned before. He was one of the great scholars in Damascus, known for the madhab, the Hanbali madhab, scholar in his own right. And there she memorized the Quran. And she also learned the various rudimentary sciences. She memorized the entire Quran, and she mentioned she benefited from other basic sciences. And she benefited from various women who taught her the Quran and who benefited her. Primarily, she benefited and learned the Quran and its sciences from the wife of Hafid al-Mizzi, the wife of Imam al-Mizzi. Now, who's Imam al-Mizzi? Imam al-Mizzi, rahimahullah, for those of us not familiar, at that time he was the muhaddith of his era par excellence. He was the muhaddith of his era. Now, we said before in our biography, series, that the ulama at that time, there were different levels, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyim, Dhahabi, etc. And the leading scholar in hadith, according to Ibn Kathir and others, who they used to themselves call their shaykh in hadith, was Hafid al-Mizzi, Jamaluddin al-Mizzi. They used to call him the shaykh of hadith at his time. And so she would benefit at the hands of his wife. Let me just correct myself there. She memorized the Quran. I'll correct myself here. She memorized the Quran in Syria and Damascus under the tutelage of Abi Umar al-Maqdisi. And then after that, when she became half of the Quran, then she taught many of the sisters, and amongst those who learned and finished the Quran with her was Hafid Mizzi's wife. This is correct. So I correct myself there. She memorized the Quran and she studied at the hands of Shamsuddin Ibn Abi Umar al-Maqdisi, and then after becoming proficient in the Quran, she spent time teaching the sisters, and then she taught many of them the Quran, and her hands memorized the entire Quran was the wife of Jamaluddin al-Mizzi, and her name was Aisha bint Siddiq. Subhanallah. It was a beautiful name, Aisha bint Siddiq. So here, her knowledge and her benefit, and it was starting from a young age. Who she benefited from, who she taught, who taught her. She's already surrounded by the people of knowledge. This was mentioned by Hafid ibn Kathir al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya in relation to her education. Now, she continued her studies until she became prominent in teaching and benefiting the sisters and her fiqh and understanding of the deen, until she reached a prominent position as a one who used to give wa'adh. Wa'ida, she used to give good heart-moving admonishments to the sisters, and she used to do tarbiyah for them, i.e. she used to raise them and mentor them and uplift them. And this is something which is very important. Very important, because nowadays, as we see in our society, it's very important, just like there are teachers and murabbiyun and mentors and cultivators for the men, there need to be for the women. So Zainab, Fatima, she was one of those who she would teach the sisters, as we said, benefit them, teach them the Quran. And she would also raise them, i.e. mentor them and give them advice and admonishments. And this is something which is a pinnacle responsibility, because this role is something which, as much as the mashayikh and the male teachers can do, there are certain things and influences only the sisters can have on each other, i.e. a sister needs to be amongst other sisters and teach them and benefit them and cultivate them. So she used to do that, and she used to order the good and prohibit the evil. She used to order the good and prohibit the evil. And from those unique positions that she had, due to her knowledge and due to her brilliance, is that she openly challenged, i.e. warned against, a prominent group at the time of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah as a Sufi sect and tariqah known as the Ahmadiyyah. So it's not the Ahmadiyyah that we have nowadays, when we say the Ahmadiyyah, the Qadianis. No, it was a Sufi group known as Ahmadiyyah, or some say Muhammadiyyah, who were a deviant kind of group, Sufi group, who had their deviants. They're popular in Sham, Greater Syria and Egypt. And they used to call to weird things, such as the free mixing between male and females. And they used to do other weird things. Subhanallah, free mixing. They used to call to the free mixing between males and females. And women gathering with the men without hijab and other weird things. A'yadu billah. And this is the same group. If anyone knows the biography of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, this is the same group who Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he had a problem with in his time, and he challenged. Now, with that being said, this great scholar, female scholar, she challenged them by warning against them and their ways. Hafid ibn Kathir mentions in Bidayah wal-Nihaya, وَكَانَ ابْنَ عَالِمَاتِ الْفَاضِلَاتِ. She was from the female virtuous scholars. تَأْمُرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَى عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. She used to order the good and prohibit the evil. وَتَقُومُ عَلَى أَحْمَدِيَّةِ. She stood in front of the Ahmadiyya, i.e. stood against them, and she took them to account due to their relationship and they had and the free mixing with the women and the young girls. وَتُنْكِرْ أَحْوَالُهُمْ وَأَحْوَالَ أَهْلِ الْبِدْعِ وَغَيْرِهِمْ. And she used to detest their situation and the situation of the people of innovation. وَتَفْعَلُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ مِمَّا لَا يُقَدِّرُ وَلَا يَقْدَرُ عَلَيْهِ كَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ الرِّجَالِ. Subhanallah. He then continued. He says, Imam Ibn Kathir, and she used to do in terms of ordering the good and prohibiting evil and good deeds, that which many men could not do. That which many men could not do, subhanallah. And what we see here is that the quality that she has of ordering the good and forbidding the evil and challenging, i.e. standing up to Ahl Bid'ah and warning against them, these are the signs of her correct methodology and the soundness of her manhaj. And this shows you that the women have a part too in commanding the good and forbidding the evil in the way that befits them, and also participating in warning the sisters, other sisters, from that which is wrong, of wrong methodology and wrong groups, and also that women can get involved in refutations against the people who deserve it, and to participate in that which is of good. This is a powerful point. And when we look at this, she said that what many men could not do, because at her time, of course, there were many great men, but look at this quality that that is highlighting. That she stood against them, i.e. the Al-Bid'ah, and warned against them and their affairs. And this is something which, subhanAllah, when we think today, we find that this quality still exists amongst the great students of knowledge, female students of knowledge, and even the shaykhas, whether they be all across the world. For example, in Yemen, and like Abdullah al-Wadi'iyah, Shaykh Muqbil's daughter, or Shaykh Muqbil's wife and his female students, all of these women participating in knowledge and warning against people invasion. This is a great sign that there are people like this out there. And as the women, when they're upon the correct methodology, they too have the role as share. And Shaykh Muqbil often will say that the women who studied in Damaj and benefited from there, he mentioned that they would participate in writing refutations to people miskindness. And so, this is one of the great qualities that she had. Continuing, it's also mentioned that she was extremely intelligent and knowledgeable. And to show the extent of her knowledge, just to show, is that she used to go to the lessons of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Kathir says in the Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya that وَقَدْ كَانَتْ تَحْضُرُ مَجْلِسَ الشَّيْخِ تَقِيُّ الدِّينِ ibn Taymiyyah. She used to attend the lessons of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah. This is important. Where did she learn these qualities of responding to Ahl Bid'ah and standing firm upon the Sunnah? None other than her teachers, who she benefited from. And when she used to go to the classes of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, this is a benefit. I want the sisters to pay attention to this. فَاسْتَفَادَتْ مِنْهُ ذَلِكَ وَغَيْرُهُ. She benefited from that and from others. And he says that I heard Shaykh al-Islam, Hafiz ibn Kathir says, I heard Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, I heard him praising her. And he described her as having virtue and knowledge. And she used to mention, means when she was in the class, he says that Ibn Taymiyyah said about her, he mentioned that أنها كانت تستحضر كثيرا من المغني أو أكثره. Subhanallah. That he says, that Ibn Taymiyyah says, rahimahullah, that she memorized on top of her mind, i.e. she had in her recall, memory, the Kitab al-Mughni of Ibn Qudama, most of it, if not a large part of it. Subhanallah. If anyone knows Kitab al-Mughni Ibn Qudama, that is the advanced work in the madhab of the Hanabila, let alone the madhab of the Hanabila. It's one of the contemporary fiqh books that everyone goes back to. She had that much knowledge, memorized. And so with this, he continued and says that because of this deep knowledge that she had, that when she used to go to the class of Ibn Taymiyyah, she used to ask excellent questions due to her sharp memory and understanding. And due to this, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah used to prepare for his lessons. Imagine, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, we know him from the biography that we covered before, about him and his quick memory and the knowledge is between his two eyes, everything that he needed. He's already, Allahumma barak, so knowledgeable. But when it comes to the classes, when she would attend, he would prepare. Because of the many questions that she would ask, the delicate issues that she would ask about, due to her quick memory and her excellent questioning, he would prepare so he can answer her questions properly. And she memorized, she helped many of the sisters finish the Quran. SubhanAllah. If that is not enough of a testimony of her knowledge, if that alone is sufficiency for testimony of her knowledge. That Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah used to prepare. She used to prepare for her to, when she attended the lesson, to answer her questions. And it shows you again the power and the knowledge of the women, that this idea that the sisters cannot reach the same level of knowledge of the men, or there's a lack of encouragement for that. This is something which, unfortunately, our society has been placing on the sisters, and many of times our society does not put emphasis on the sisters to become knowledgeable about their religion. If we look in our mass media, and even sadly in many of our Muslim communities, i.e. in the Western world, we see that the sisters gain notoriety and fame and name for things other than beneficial knowledge. And there seems to be this idea that the sisters, they can become beneficial, they help the community in other areas, i.e. of doing other things besides beneficial knowledge. And this is not correct. For beneficial knowledge, like for the men, is also obligatory on the women to seek, but also they should strive in it. طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim. We know this hadith that seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim, but seeking the bounty of Allah and working hard in it is not limited to anybody, male or female. قال الله تعالى وما كان عطاء ربك محظورا. Allah, He says in the noble Quran, in Surah Al-Isra, Allah says, and the bounties of your Lord can never be forbidden. There's nobody who can tell themselves that they're not capable of obtaining this beneficial knowledge. So this great female scholar is not only an example for the sister, but also a motivation between combining between ilm and amal, knowledge and action, and being like her in terms of doing things with the knowledge. Now I'm going to continue by mentioning in the biography that she also would help many of the sisters make tawbah and repent. And this is the point I want to really highlight, because we covered many of the sisters before who had knowledge and who had da'wah and who had makana, status in the ummah. And I want to highlight this part, which is that when the sisters gain beneficial knowledge, they need to participate in doing da'wah to the sisters. Such an important responsibility. Here, it's mentioned in her biography. So we already mentioned her intelligence. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah also said something similar. That Ibn Taymiyyah used to praise her, and he was amazed by her diligence, and he was amazed by her eagerness and her intelligence. وَانْتَفَعَ بِهَا نِسَاء أَهْلِ دِمِشْقِ. And the women of Dimishq, i.e. Damascus, they benefited by her due to her truthfulness in her way that she used to give the admonishments, and due to her self-contentment, and due to her benefit that she had. And this raised her status, and she reached a great status that people used to benefit from her, and the sisters would gather around her. And she studied fiqh with, we said, along with Ibn Taymiyyah, she studied with Abi Umar al-Maqdisi. And what's interesting is the idea of how she benefited the sisters. And so what I want to highlight here is that what she used to do, how did she benefit the other sisters, i.e. how did they learn with her? What did they benefit from her gatherings? Hafid ibn Imam al-Zahabi, he says about her in Ibar, after he mentions her name and her background, she says that many of the sisters benefited from her, وَتَابُوا, and they repented at her hands. وَكَانَتْ وَافِرَ الْعِلْمِ. She had an abundance of knowledge. قَانِعَةً, self-content, بِالْيَسِيرِ. She was ascetic very much. زاهدة. حريصة على النفع. She was extremely eager in benefit. وَتَذْكِيرِ, and reminding others. ذات إخلاص. One who possessed ikhlas, وَخَشْيَةً, and awe of Allah, وَأَمْرُ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And then he says here, and this is the shahin, she made انصرح بها النساء دمشق ثم نساء مصر. That she was the cause of many women in both Damascus and in Egypt becoming upright and practicing. Why? Because of her sincere preaching. Volume 1, page 276. Imam al-Zahabi rahimahullah mentions al-Ibar fi khabar man ghabar. Now, what is that? How did she used to do this? How did she used to benefit the sisters? And what did she used to do? it's mentioned that she would sit down in the gathering and she would have a special sitting in which she would remind the sisters. As-Safadi says she used to have or sit on the minbar. Now there's a khilaf here, as I mentioned this some time ago. Does she sit on the minbar of the masjid, or is there a special minbar made for her? This is a discussion, but we're not going to entertain that due to time, because there's another issue that comes. Was she giving admonishments to the men and women, or just the women? And this is a story for another time, but what seems to be correct was just the women. This is the correct conclusion. Just the women, not the men, as some people try to claim, and there's no clear proof for that. So, with that, she used to sit on the minbar, or a minbar, and the women would attend. And she would give the admonishment, and it would affect many, and those who benefited draw near, and those who didn't, they would, i.e. those who were not responsive or not benefiting, would not attend. And due to her benefits, i.e. her wa'ad, her admonishment, وَانْتَفَعَ بِوَعْدِهَا جَمَاعَ مِنَ النِّسْوَةِ. A group of women became affected by her great teaching and great admonishment. وَرَقَتْ قُلُوبُهُنْ, and their hearts became softened after they being hard. So this is important, that their hearts became softened after being hard. And this is what I'm trying to highlight here, that the sister participating in da'wah amongst the sisters, gathering them, whether they be in the houses, maybe in their private homes, or for example, gathering them in the masajid, having lessons, doing da'wah. This is such a powerful thing, missing today in our community, in that most of the time the gatherings are limited. They're not enough. And the sisters, they need it just as the men, they needed those gatherings where the hearts are moved and the eyes are drawn to tears. فعل النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, as Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم used to do with his Sahaba, he would move them with these lectures. So continuing, due to this, their hearts would become shaken, and they would become obedient to Allah after being hard-hearted, and they would be reminded after being forgetful, and the eyes would shed tears of regret for what passed, of the things they did mistakes, and due to that, many people became guided. Subhanallah al-Azim. This alima continued her work until she moved in the beginning of the Qarn al-Thamin, so in the beginning of the 8th century, she moved to Qahira, Cairo, Egypt. And there she continued her benefits, benefiting the women there, teaching them. And this is the idea, that she continued her benefit. And Ibn Hajar says about her fiqh, كانت تدري فقه جيدة. She had a very good fiqh. And she continued her benefit, teaching them and benefiting them in Cairo as well. Afwan, yes. So she moved at the beginning. So at the year 700 Hijri, she moved to Egypt. And actually, I want to correct myself. I believe I made a mistake in the beginning when I mentioned she was born 714. Right? I should correct myself that she was born earlier than that. The birth is not there, but the death, she died the year 714 Hijri. So I apologize for that. He died the year 714 Hijri. So she was born earlier than that, but she died in Egypt in the year 714. The year 714 Hijri, in Egypt, in Cairo, she died. That's the year of her death. As for her birth, then it was before that, Wallahu A'lam, the exact date. But in the year 700, she moved, right? So the beginning of the 7th century, she moved to Egypt, and she continued her benefits there. And she continued until her passing. As we said, many of the sisters benefited from her, and she would continue in her ways of commanding the good and forbidding the evil. and she would continue to remind them and continue to inspire them and acting upon her knowledge and calling the people towards khair. And for those reasons, the scholars, when they write a biography about her, they praise her. But as we mentioned, the great praises that they gave for her, due to her knowledge, due to her standing against the people of innovation, due to her asceticism. And she continued like this until she passed away in the year 714 Hijri, year 714 Hijri. And the interesting thing that we're taking from this is a female scholar amongst the scholars that we mentioned already in our other lessons, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Dhahab, Ibn Qayyim, etc. But a woman who, with this knowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted her, was a source of rectification and reform for the other sisters. And this is so seldom spoke about in our time, in that there isn't the same kind of emphasis that the sisters should participate in da'wah and they help one another. And in fact, we find sometimes that even if there is emphasis, it isn't given the same kind of energy and the same kind of focus. Imam Hafid ibn Rajab Hanbali, in his Dhayl ala Tabaqat Hanabila, she says that she was an aesthetic worshipper of Allah, a scholar, one who was a muftiyya, passed fatwas. She feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he also describes her, says she's mujtahida. She strove in the worship of Allah. Sawwama qawwama. She would fast a lot. She would pray a lot. Qawwala bil-haq. Spoke the truth openly. And that she lived a very humble and very self-content life. And again, these qualities combining, and so important to see the relationship throughout our series between knowledge, self-contentment, and asceticism. That these are the qualities that are come together that condone knowledge and its benefit. You find almost always the ulama mentioning somebody has knowledge, but also with that have contentment. Also having with that asceticism, not worrying about the dunya, and also acting upon their knowledge. And this is a quality that we find. Also, it's described, Imam Ibn Rajab, he says, rahimahullah, she was farida fi dahriha. She was literally the unique one of her time, like in terms of her position, her status. تسأل عن دقائق المسائل. She used to be asked about the most subtle and the most what's the word for it, delicate of the مسائل العلمية, and she was proficient in fiqh إتقانا بالغا, right, with the absolute proficiency, and she had abundance of knowledge. And what's unique about all of this is that, subhanallah, that when we look and we see this, we find that it inspires us to see that in Islam, there are women scholars, women reformers for the women, just like there are for men. And Islam is not like, as others claim, and this is important because I want to finish with this point in comparison to Christianity, in that Christianity we find so much discussion about their male propagators, preachers, but where are their female scholars and their female preachers and their female reformers? Comparatively, they don't have, as not even close to what Islam and the Muslims have produced of knowledge of people. And how many examples we have we come across just in this short series, let alone the thousands that are mentioned in the books. And I want to mention all of this as inspiration in our time, especially in today's time. As we said, that there is a lack of attention given to this. And sometimes we may even think to ourselves, a'yadhu billah, that there are no women who ever did any such reform and such benefit. No, they exist. And all of this reform benefit ala hudud al-shara', within the boundaries of the sharia, and that's the defining quality. It doesn't necessitate that the female reformer, she's going against the Quran and Sunnah. Just as we mentioned Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, Darda, and many others, they're teaching, they're benefiting within the framework of the sharia. And this is the last point I want to highlight, that from these examples we see that just because, and this is important because in our time today we're being told mixed messages that sisters, in order for them to become beneficial, helpful, that they need to do things that are against the sharia, i.e., for example, appearing in front of the men, appearing in front of the cameras, appearing in front, as if this is the only method. Again, in the minds of men, this is how reform is done. But when we look at the people who passed before us, teach sisters who taught other sisters, women, female scholars who taught other females, and who also produced under their hands hufaz, produced at their hands people who are righteous, who had people repent at their hands, they did it according to the way of the sharia. So who said then that this model, which is Mubarak, It's blessed, this way of teaching, doing it the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encouraged us, means the da'wah has to be done the way that it's legislated. Who said this model doesn't have its fruits? But today we have this other version being propagated, Allah al-Musta'an, in which our sisters are being thrust forward. And the question we should be asked, not only is this not something advised and legislated in our Sharia, but where are the fruits of such efforts versus those who passed before us, like the example we're looking at today, Fatima bint Abbas al-Baghdadiyyah. Due to sincerity and knowledge and benefit, the great efforts come. Lessons that we can take from this is that there are always and continue to be female scholars and people of knowledge existent, wallahi alhamd, until our era today. We also see the benefit that women should aim high for their knowledge. They should act upon it, guide others, and do work in the community, working with the sisters, and put a serious effort in trying to bring them closer. Also, we see the power of ikhlas, because ikhlas is what makes people successful. It's nothing else. After Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tawfiq and rahmah on us, that we can even be guided, we have the most important ingredient in success is ikhlas. It's not about the other things that we fear. That's why Imam Ibn Rajab, he describes her. Imam Ibn Rajab. He said about her that she was one who was ذات إخلاص. I believe it was Ibn Rajab who commented that. No, afwan, that was this is al-Maghrizi, Taqiyuddin al-Maghrizi. He says she was one who possessed sincerity. She died 714 al-Hijri, and it's mentioned that she died in Cairo. According to Imam Zahabi Ibn Kathir, many women attended, many people attended her janazah. Rahimahullah rahmatan wasi'ah. And she died approximately in her 80s. The question says, is it ever okay, inshallah we'll open now for the questions, is it ever okay for a woman, if she's serious and seeking knowledge, to put off marriage? Now this is something that comes for anyone seeking knowledge, putting off the marriage or not getting married. We find that some of our scholars, this was a situation, that they didn't get married either due to their business and knowledge or due to delaying it, due to their travels, etc., or the benefit that they were engaged in. And as for Fatima, rahimahullah, it's not clear if she was married or not, and so something to investigate further. But that it should not be taken as the case that marriage itself and having a family does not negate seeking knowledge, nor does it prevent it. And for those reasons, the ulama of the past used to mention delaying marriage was something which they often would mention. Many of the scholars in the past, Khatib al-Baghdadi, rahimahullah, and others, would mention the delay of seeking of marriage for the student of knowledge in order for them to exert their effort in the younger age to travel and to visit mashayikh and to read and to benefit. And due to that, they were able to expand. And later on, when they are past, they reach a certain level of knowledge, then to get married. For those reasons, Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah, got married late. But others mention, our mashayikh in today's time, that due to the increase in fitna and the trials and tribulations of our era, that in reality getting married now is in no way going to negate the seeking knowledge. Rather, it could be aid for it, as we see in today's time, that there are many fitnas. So while I don't have the clear answer whether or not she was married or not, something to investigate further, is that there's no negation that the knowledge and getting married would delay or prevent someone from knowledge. As we saw in last week's lesson, Darda radiyallahu anha, Darda rahimahullah, the second, as-Sughra, she benefited primarily from her husband Abu Darda radiyallahu anhu. So knowledge and reality can also be attained by way of getting married, right? And this is something which we see. So in reality, we would not advise someone to delay primarily, but if somebody obviously isn't learning, because we do know to have some knowledge, basic knowledge is important for every Muslim, must have. But in terms of delaying it, we would say that while the scholars in the past advised that as things have changed, getting married is very important as well and should be given consideration. Everybody knows their situation better. But in terms of her, it's not clear, and that's something we should investigate to find out further. But this is what the ulama, they generally advise. If anyone else has any questions or anything, inshallah. The question says, is there a method for organizing or memorizing fiqh rulings? In reality, as I think Brother Salah is going to come in just about now, so we'll end with this last question, that there is a method for memorizing and organizing fiqh issues, and the ulama have given different advices. So for example, some of them have mentioned that when it comes to the fiqh rulings, some of them they memorize and they encourage the learning of them through the books of fiqh. So as you go through the books of fiqh, you record and you benefit from the masail that I mentioned, the issues that are mentioned there, and then recording the evidence and the conclusions, and then try to commit that to memory. Others, they obviously we mentioned the beginning is to memorize first a matan, first to memorize a particular a text in fiqh, and then memorize after that, first memorizing the text, then memorizing after that, during the explanation, memorizing the evidences. So there are different ways of doing it. But the way that someone should remember is that the masail, the issues of fiqh which they need daily and you often require, it's important to commit them to memory, making notes that are clear. For example, what is the issue? What is the evidence for the issue? Or what's the conclusion for the issue? What's the khulasa and the qawl rajih, the more correct and stronger opinion from that which you have derived and concluded. Then next, the evidence for that. Then the sources for where this can be found. And so while doing this can help you then to commit to memory first obviously somebody needs to study it, understand the conclusion, have the evidences for it, know the sources for it, and then commit it to memory this way. Inshallah, in other lessons we can explain other advices given by the ulama, but there are different ways. Some include first memorizing the matan, a simple text in basic fiqh on a particular issue, and then memorizing in the second reading when you're doing the explanation and doing the commentary, going through the evidences and learning that, so you know the text, you know the evidence and explanation. There you have it. But oftentimes some of the issues require research or require comparative fiqh. So inshallah, perhaps in other lessons we can talk about a practical way of doing that. But it's so important for someone to commit to memory these things, at least the conclusion, the correct opinion, and i.e. the evidence or the source from where you have taken this. That way you can direct somebody to where to look further. And of course, constant review. And that's why the notes that we take during our lessons and the notes that we take during our various classes throughout the week, everyone should be taking their notes and reviewing their notes periodically. It means daily, weekly, so that you will not forget the masail in there. And this is why it's important also to develop sometimes groups, study groups between the friends, and you test one another. And you bring forth a mas'ala, and then the munaqasha, discussion, proof, issue, reasoning, opinion. That way you're going to become more versified in the issue, and that's why many of the students, they do that as well. After the lesson, they sit together with their colleagues and they rehearse the lesson and the evidences in the issue. And sometimes there's a difference of opinion. They debate in a friendly and academic manner to increase in knowledge. Inshallah, that helps. And perhaps in other lessons we can talk about in more detail how to do that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us beneficial knowledge, increase us in it, and allow us to act upon it, that which we have of knowledge. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.